On December 12, 1963, Kenya proudly celebrated its hard-fought independence from British colonial rule. Just 16 days later, the new government was faced with a critical situation. The northeastern region was engulfed in escalating violence, prompting the declaration of a state of emergency. Ethnic Somalis residing in the area were pushing for secession and aiming to unite with the Somali Republic. And guess what? The Somali Republic was more than happy to support their fight for secession. And so, the stage was set for a truly complicated geopolitical journey between Kenya and Somalia. Fast forward to present-day Kenya, and you'll find nearly 3 million individuals of Somali descent, making them the country's 6th largest ethnic group. But here's the fascinating part. Their journey to becoming Kenyans wasn't a simple matter of choice. It's a tale of historical intricacies and the profound impact of ever-shifting borders. Long before borders were etched into maps, the Somali people had expanded their presence towards the southwest, settling in areas that now stretch across both Kenya and Ethiopia. As fate would have it, they found themselves sharing lands with the nomadic Oromo subgroups who had journeyed southward from Ethiopia, adding another layer of cultural fusion to the region. However, when the British arrived in East Africa, they extended their influence eastward all the way to the Juba River. Their objective? To establish a strategic buffer zone, halting any further migration into the lush Kenyan highlands that had become home to British farmers. But here's where things get really interesting. In 1925, a series of convoluted dealings between the colonizers that we won't delve into right now resulted in the British giving up this whole region called Jubaland to the Italians who had colonized Somalia. This solidified the border we know today between Kenya and Somalia. Now, here's the kicker. This border was drawn without much thought for the communities it would divide. It was arbitrary, lacking any consideration for the lives it would shape and the generations it would impact. The British decided to give this whole area a name, the Northern Frontier District, or NFD, a vast expanse of land characterized by semi-arid climate. It had its fair share of challenges that made governance quite a difficult task. Banditry and raids were all too common among the communities residing there, which created a sense of insecurity and unrest. Now, here's the unfortunate part. Despite the need for improvements in education, healthcare, and economic development, these efforts often took a back seat. The primary focus in the NFD became security and control, leaving little room for progress in other areas. As a result, the region felt left behind, marginalized, and underdeveloped. The people living there felt the impact of this neglect, and it shaped their identity in a unique way. They developed a distinct regional identity, holding on to their sense of belonging and culture as they faced constant challenges and felt the need to prove themselves. While all this was happening in the NFD, British Somaliland gained its independence and merged with the former Italian Somaliland to form the Somali Republic. This significant development provided inspiration and motivation for the political leaders in the NFD. The majority of the NFD population, being of Somali ethnic origin, felt a deep connection to their Somali brethren in the Somali Republic. They shared a common history, language, and cultural heritage, which fueled their desire for unification. Moreover, the Somali Republic government itself supported the NFD's fight for secession. They saw it as a means to achieve their own larger objective of creating a greater Somali state, encompassing all Somali inhabited territories across the Horn of Africa. As Kenya was on the brink of gaining independence, the British decided to appoint a commission whose task was to gauge the desires and opinions of the NFD inhabitants regarding the future of the region. After thorough investigation and engagement with the local population, the commission presented its findings. A significant majority of 86% of the inhabitants of the NFD expressed their preference for union with the Somali Republic. This was a clear indication of the strong desire for secession and the aspiration to join their Somali brethren across the border. The voices of the NFD inhabitants could not be ignored, and their aspirations had to be taken into account in the ongoing independence discussions. Despite the overwhelming support for secession expressed by the inhabitants of the NFD, the British did not heed their wishes. Instead, they made a decision that disregarded the desires of the majority. They announced the establishment of a separate seventh region within Kenya, known as the Northeastern Region. This region was to be granted a status equal to the other 6 regions in the country. The announcement of this decision became a catalyst for pro-secession violence, leading to sporadic attacks and riots across the region. The violence in the NFD eventually escalated into a full-blown insurgency. This insurgency involved guerrilla groups, commonly referred to as shifters, who carried out targeted attacks on government installations and personnel. The support from the Somali Republic strengthened the capabilities of the shifters, enabling them to carry out more sophisticated attacks against government forces while having the advantage of retreating across the porous border into Somalia. In response, Kenya imposed counterinsurgency measures which included curfews, livestock seizures, and property confiscations, as well as a program of forced villagization, which contradicted the traditional nomadic lifestyle practiced by many in the region. Ironically, the British had used similar methods during Kenya's fight for independence. Clan rivalries have long been a feature of Somali society, and they can have a divisive impact on various aspects. Clan rivalries within the shifter movement started to undermine its cohesion and effectiveness. These internal divisions weakened their ability to sustain the insurgency and recruit support. The Kenyan government exploited these divisions to weaken the movement. 4 years into the conflict, and after multiple diplomatic negotiations, the Somali government changed their stance and renounced their support for the shifter insurgency, ultimately leading to the decline and eventual end of the conflict. So, even after the conflict ended, there were still tensions due to inter-clan clashes and conflicts with other groups in the region. The government demanded disarmament, but then there was an attack between the Dagodia and Adjaran clans, and things took a dark turn. Thousands of Dagodia men were rounded up and detained at a nearby airstrip. Many of them were tortured, beaten, and executed. It's estimated that around 2,000 Dagodia people lost their lives in what we now know as the Wagala Massacre. It was a truly tragic event that left a lasting impact on the region. Fast forward to 1991, and Somalia experienced a significant event: the collapse of its government. This led to a power vacuum and a brutal civil war that tore the country apart. With no central authority, various warlords emerged, each seeking control and influence over different regions. Amidst the chaos, an extremist group called Al-Shabaab emerged and capitalized on the instability to pursue its own agendas. By the late 2000s, Al-Shabaab's control over southern Somalia brought them dangerously close to Kenya's border, where they were able to conduct cross-border attacks. This raised serious concerns for Kenya's national security and its vital tourism sector. To safeguard its borders, Kenya came up with a strategic plan: the creation of Azania, a semi-autonomous state led by Mohammed Abdi Ganthi, a former Somali defense minister. Azania's primary purpose was to serve as a strong buffer zone between Kenya's border and the menacing threat of Al-Shabaab. However, the transitional federal government in Mogadishu vehemently opposed this idea, fearing that it undermined the goal of unifying Somalia under a single government. In 2011, following a series of abductions of foreigners in Kenya by Somali militants, Kenyan troops launched a decisive incursion into Somalia to push back the militants. It was during this campaign that an alliance was formed between Kenyan forces and Ahmad Madobe, a battle-hardened former ally of Al-Shabaab. What? But this time, Madobe had his own militia, the Ras Kamboni movement, with an unwavering objective to conquer Al-Shabaab, making him a natural ally to Kenya in their shared mission. While the Somali government criticized the invasion as illegal, both sides eventually recognized the urgency of joining forces against the common enemy, Al-Shabaab. Together, they made significant progress, liberating several towns, including the crown jewel of Jubaland, Kismayo. This strategic port city served as Al-Shabaab's economic powerhouse, generating revenue through extortion, piracy, taxes, and charcoal exports. In 2013, Ahmed Madobe, also known as Kenya's man in Somalia, was elected as the president of Jubaland. However, the Somali federal government remained persistently wary of his intentions and close ties to Kenya, resulting in a lack of genuine support for his leadership. Tensions between Madobe and the federal government escalated in 2019, leading to a perilous standoff between his Jubaland forces and the Somali army, which tragically displaced tens of thousands of innocent civilians. For Kenya, a prosperous and stable Jubaland, backed by a strong administration, promised a crucial buffer zone solution to address its own security concerns. Despite the complexities and potential backlash, Kenya perceived Madobe as the right leader to realize this key objective. However, this support risked appearing as a betrayal to the Somali national government that Kenya had played a role in establishing. Kenya and its traditional ally, Ethiopia, now find themselves on opposing sides due to divergent alliances in Somalia. Ethiopia threw its support behind the government in Mogadishu, while Kenya deepened its ties with Madobe. Notably, some Jubalanders, including Madobe himself, hail from the Ogaden clan, which also resides in Ethiopia's Ogaden region. Consequently, the prospect of an independent Jubaland has raised the stakes for Ethiopia, potentially fueling demands for secession from the Ogaden National Liberation Front rebels. Meanwhile, Kenya faced retaliatory acts within its borders as al-Shabaab launched numerous attacks. As a result, Kenyan troops continue to maintain a presence in Somalia to this day, as part of the African Union mission. However, the mission is scheduled to withdraw in 2024, signifying a pivotal turning point in the ongoing engagement between Kenya and Somalia.
My administration continues to reach out to the Federal Republic of Somalia in an effort to find an amicable and sustainable solution to the maritime boundary disputes between us.
While the quest for peace persisted on land, Kenya and Somalia found themselves embroiled in a maritime tussle offshore. For over 6 long years, these two nations couldn't agree on where exactly their maritime border should be. Countless rounds of diplomatic negotiations left them empty-handed. So, in 2014, Somalia decided to take the matter to the International Court of Justice, seeking a resolution. A bone of contention? A vast area of about 100,000 square kilometers in the Indian Ocean, brimming with potential gas and oil deposits. Kenya argued that the maritime boundary should follow a straight line of latitude, much like the borders with neighboring countries based on historical colonial standards. On the other hand, Somalia claimed that the boundary should extend southeastward, following an extension of the land border. This would encroach upon a significant portion of what Kenya considered its exclusive economic zone. In 2019, tensions between Kenya and Somalia reached a boiling point when leaked documents revealed Somalia's auctioning of offshore oil blocks in the disputed territory. This move triggered a diplomatic crisis, leading both nations to sever relations and recall their ambassadors. However, after 2 years of strained ties, diplomatic relations were restored through the mediation efforts of Qatar. After years of anticipation, the ICJ made its long-awaited ruling in October 21, redrawing the maritime boundary between Kenya and Somalia. To the delight of Somalia, the decision heavily favored them, granting a significant portion of the disputed area. The court's agreement with Somalia's argument, based on the principle of equal distance from the country's coasts, aligned with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Somalia welcomed the decision, embracing it as a satisfying resolution to the long-standing dispute. In contrast, Kenya stood firm, adamantly rejecting the ruling and maintaining its claim to the disputed area.
Decision is, in the circumstances, a zero-sum game, which will only strain the relations between our two countries.
As the ICJ lacks enforcement mechanisms, Kenya may choose to defy the ruling, leaving the situation in a state of uncertainty. The geopolitical dance between Kenya and Somalia continues.